Hey everybody, it's getting dangerously close to the end of the semester. Um, Most of you I think have made it through the post-spring break blues and are back in the swing of things. Last week in one class we talked about the idea of internal and external review of the police. Um, a lot of controversy regarding that. And I think you hit a lot of the great points. Officers are concerned that someone's going to be making judgments of them from a position of never having, been in that type of a situation. The people, the proponents of external review, say the police are biased and are going to always find in favor of officers. And from my experience, if it's a service complaint, somebody doesn't like the way they were talked to, maybe they felt the officer should have done more on a particular case, I think the idea of bias is going to really it's going to be predominant because the stakes aren't that high. When it comes to a serious complaint, I think most agencies are looking to get people out of the profession that are prone to those kind of issues. And by those kind of issues, I mean, it can be, all kinds of stuff. It could be theft. It could be improper handling of evidence. I mean, and here's a great example, and this is the law of unintended consequences. Officers in the past used to take and would destroy small amounts of marijuana on car stops when marijuana was illegal. Well, people started to make the assertion that the officer had actually kept the marijuana for themselves. So the unintended consequence was if an officer was going to destroy marijuana, the officer needed to seize it, book it into property, document the stop, the contact, and what was going to happen to the product, meaning it was going to be destroyed. Well, officer said, if I've got to do a report, I got to book it into property, or writing a ticket, charging that isn't that big of a deal. I might as well do that and get some credit for the stop. Law of unintended consequences. So, significant issues, I think you see a greater willingness to investigate. Sometimes the expectation of people that are involved in those situations doesn't meet what's going to happen in the investigation and how the investigation is going to be undertaken. The second part of the class, or the other class, dealt with a really interesting issue, and that's the Senate Bill 230 and the old AB 931 and AB 392, which are the use of force guidelines. Here's what I wanted you to get out of that. That they're under 392, 931 was defeated. There's a lot of shenanigans that were played there to try to get that passed. And 931 was more set up that, okay, well, you don't like this bill, well, then how about this bill, which was a little bit softer. So 392 will change the holding or the requirement from Graham versus Connor from this objectively reasonable standard to a subjective standard. And what that means is that it's going to be from what people thought, but what the jury thinks should have been done. And it's going to, my guess is it'll come down to a battle of experts. Which expert is best able to talk about how they are, the police should have acted in a situation. That's going to be an interesting one with the law of unintended consequences. That will be something to really really think about. So that was last week. This week we're going to talk about policing multicultural communities. And you've got a couple of things. First, let's talk about language and culture. Language, if you can't communicate with somebody, it makes it a really long day for everybody to get their point across, to get proper service, taken care of, and to develop a relationship with the people that are involved. That's one section of this. The other section is culture. And if you go into, an officer goes into a cultural environment where there are expectations that are different than you would get in the Caucasian community, well, that also is going to be a problem because everybody's going to have to adjust. And if you are in a migrant community with a large migrant population, the migrants are going to be less likely to be trusting of the police. They're going to be thinking about maybe prior contacts. Also, what happens in their country when the police get involved, because the police in the United States and in many Western areas in Canada, Western Europe are generally pretty good, and about how they treat people. You get into other areas where you may have some police tactics that are very dominating, and the police are feared. Where predominantly in the United States the police aren't feared. Maybe they're held back a little bit because people never quite sure as to what's going to happen to them. So that's the first part of the chapter. The second part is a pretty lengthy discussion about racial profiling and some of the issues that are related to race in the police. A huge issue, a super hot issue. It really started to expand during the Obama administration. And then you had a series of incidents where at times the officers acted wholly inappropriately. Say it's Baltimore where the guy made the car stop and the guy ran away and then he shot him and planted a taser on him or some nonsense. Well, he was arrested and was convicted of and sentenced to jail. So it wasn't. First off, it never should have happened. I don't know what caused that to happen on both sides. Why did the guy run? I think he was suspended. Why did he run? He's in a car that was traceable back to him, if I remember correctly. So it didn't make sense. But then the second thing that didn't make sense is what happened to the officer? What caused him to lose his mind and take those actions? And I don't know. Then you have on the other side, you have the Ferguson, Missouri problem. And you know how the media took a false narrative and ran with it. And I bet there's many people in these two classes that still believe that Brown was standing with his hands up and back turned, and the officer just got out and shot him for no reason. Saw him walking down the street. There was a confrontation about how the officer was driving, and the officer got out and killed him. And that's not true. That isn't what actually happened. But that comes into play when the community looks at the relationship with the police. So we'll talk about that in the chapters, and then also there's some discussion about those things in the slide deck this week. Then the next thing we talk about is the underrepresentation of minorities and women in law enforcement. And the problem with that is twofold. First, I'm going to suggest American culture. And American culture is police work, the legislature, are male-dominated environments. And that's a cultural bias for women. And for minorities, it's also been a cultural bias that those people that were brought into police work were, were male, were, uh, usually very significant. I'm a prime example. I'm white, Irish Catholic, and big. And, that was kind of what police work was like. In the 1980s, there was 5% of police officers were women. Some areas, Irvine is a good example, really good department for women to be involved in. Upper echelons of management, deputy chief is a woman. And you see women throughout the rank structure. And now representation is in the high 20%. When it comes to minorities, now we've got another issue, and that's getting qualified people to come in and apply and to get through the process. If you get someone who's qualified, their chances are pretty good. Qualified means good background. Qualified means good education. Now, more and more, it's tough to get a job in police work, at least in metropolitan areas, without a bachelor's degree, and certainly in Southern California. Some of the smaller agencies, perhaps, but in the larger agencies, it's and the really good agencies, the strong agencies that have their pick of candidates, it's very difficult. So, those are just a few things on the multicultural communities. That idea of cultural conflicts, of language issues, racial barriers, talked about in the book and then also in the slide deck. So we'll try to make this one short this week, and we're not too bad. And I will see you guys